Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/080, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. Check the show out also on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Big hello to everybody. We are in beautiful summer-like weather here in Washington, D.C. I'm Tim Mooney, back for another edition of the Pedalshift Project. And on this episode, it's kind of our, mid-month, topic-driven episode. It's actually a little more expanded than normal just because I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Next week, we're going to be talking about bike packing, which is sort of my new dabble, stick my big toe in kind of thing. I know very little about it compared to sort of the traditional pannier road touring kind of setup, but I thought it would be good to get someone in to talk a little bit about it and sort of get some ideas on how to jump into it full-fledged. There are a whole bunch of resources out there, so if any of you are really into bike packing and have been waiting 80 episodes for me to even talk about it once, or at least do more than just a passing, hey, there's this thing called bike packing, we're going to be doing it starting next episode. So look for that next week. This week, this episode, I'm going to be talking in mostly gear talk sections about experimenting with paring things down, paring down your gear, which is a constant struggle for so many of us and is sort of relevant to what next week's show is going to be about, getting into maybe a more of a bike packing type of a setup. And I'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And also the topic of the episode, keeping things charged while on tour, sort of going beyond batteries and dyno hubs, like how you can develop a strategy for making sure that your gear is going to be charged up when you're on tour, because so many of us use electronic gadgets, even if it's just in passing, even if it's just to make sure that our phone is charged up so that we can make reservations or get in touch with back home or whatever we need to do. Much less the folks like me who bring along often computers and iPads and other things to try to make things more interesting for podcasts, for instance. So that's what we'll be covering on this show as well. And we've also got some connections from a listener who went on his very first overnight. So let's kick things off. So most of the show, we're going to be in the gear talk section because we're going to be talking about all different types of gear for your bike tour. And so, as I said at the top of the show, first thing I want to talk about is figuring out a way to pare down my gear. And I look at this as an experiment. And the experiment is, what's the bare minimum I need for myself personally? Everyone's got their own needs for balancing comfort with the gear that I own. And can I get into fewer bags? My idea here was to look at this in terms of both of the styles of overnights that I do. One is on the full touring bike, my Novara Safari. And normally I've been using a couple of panniers and a rack bag, also some other bags, dry bags, compression sacks that I'll put on the front rack as well. So my idea there is to try to get in a situation where I'm not in those two side panniers at the very least. And the thing that got me thinking about it was, in addition to the general, hey, I'd like to kind of pare down how much I'm hauling, I was going windy on a windy day. I was riding on a windy day, and man, it just caught my panniers in a headwind in a way that really just sort of pushed me back a bit. And I realized how much of a profile a fully loaded panniered up bike provides in windy situations. And so that was sort of the thing that got me thinking, it's about time maybe I can try to narrow myself down on the ride. So that's the first one, is on the full loaded touring bike. The other is finding a new way, a new system while riding on and touring on a Brompton. As you remember, last year at about this time, I was cycling on a Brompton in California, and it went really well. It worked great. I utilized a system that was developed. If it wasn't developed by them, it was popularized by the folks at Pathless Pedaled about having a full backpacker's backpack, and it worked really well. And I realized as I was kind of noodling on all of this, that system works really well if you need the backpack, if you're going to go on day hikes or something like that. And I think that's how they developed it, or why they developed it. Well, I figured or at least I discovered that I didn't really do that. I was using it mostly as a conveyance. And as a conveyance, something to store your stuff in, it's kind of on the heavy side and it's kind of on the bulky side. So I thought, what could I do to get out of that backpack, but still be able to ride that same ride and still have the same amount of stuff? So anyway, so those were the two different frames of references that I was doing. And what I decided to do was to work backwards from a typical day and only bringing the things that I absolutely needed for the basics. And I ended up with a list that I think works for both. I actually took the time to lay all of these things out and to actually do a dry run of packing the bags for each of the different rides. And I found that it worked out really, really well. So why don't I talk a little bit about what I've pared the list down to, and maybe even talk a little bit about what I took out. So the list I've got in the show notes, so you can go check that out at pedalshift.net/080. And the list is as follows: tent, sleeping bag, pad, pump, spare tube, multi-tool, spork, spare shirt, spare underwear, spare socks, toiletry bag, which includes little things like ibuprofen, electrolyte pills, things like that, first aid kit, very small, hat, helmet, batteries and cable, iPhone, water bottles or bladder, depending on the ride, and my wallet. That's it. You'll notice that there are a few big things missing in there. Number one is no stove, no cook kit. I did bring the spork along because I found that frequently I would, when I get stuff out, they won't have utensils, or I'll forget to get a utensil. So I think it's worth the little bit of bulk, the barely measurable bulk, to bring along a spork. I think that perhaps a smaller cook kit or a different cook kit might be something in my future, but I thought I don't need it. I can eat on the road for many of these different tours that I do. This wouldn't be an expedition style setup. This would be for the types of routes that I've done in the past where it's been a really limited wildernessy areas and that there were frequent access to towns. So for instance, I can plan ahead and grab a sandwich or something like that for dinner for that night, or otherwise bring food along that would fit into those different areas. So that's sort of what I was thinking with all of this. The other things that were really removed were things that I like to have while I'm riding fully loaded, but I don't really need. And one of those things is sort of like a chair back that was built to fit an old self-inflating thermarest that I had from 15 years ago, probably 20 years ago. And I use it just as is. It's basically got straps and it allows me to sit up in the tent. Is it necessary? No. So it easily was dispensed of, but it's the type of comfort thing that I'll bring along when I don't really care about how much I'm bringing. Also a lot of spare clothes. I find, and I don't know about the rest of you, I find I am kind of a sloppy pig, I guess. I don't change my clothes all that much. I will change my underwear. I will change socks as necessary, but I'll tend to wear the same stuff if it's only a 3 or 4 day tour. And if I'm going for longer, I'll just alternate back and forth. And if I take a shower or otherwise bathe, I'll jump into the shower at any given campsite with the stuff that I'm wearing. So it'll get cleaned at the same time as me, and then it'll dry out the next day on the bike. So I find that I go back and forth that way, and that works really well. This, of course, also doesn't really work for colder weather touring. The one thing that actually is not on this list, but actually I did end up putting in there because I realized rain gear. I've got a rain jacket, my Showers Pass rain jacket, which I really, really like and have liked quite a bit, along with the hood as well. And that was actually kind of small, so it fit just fine. So what I found was that this fit really nicely and really firmly in one pannier, one of my orange Ortlieb back roller panniers, and one compression bag. So what was really exciting about that, just in terms of how that worked, was that works for my Brompton setup really well. And what does it do? It completely eliminates the need for that rear backpack. Those of you who were along for the ride or have seen the pictures and maybe took a listen to the Pedalshift Tour Journal that I had from last year, it looked like I was going to pop a wheelie. In fact, that would be the number one kind of snarky comment that I would get, both online and in person. And of course, didn't happen ever. It was totally fine. It was weighted just fine, but it was more than I needed. And as it turns out, I can be more front loaded because it puts more weight into that front pannier. And of course, if you followed along there, I have a Brompton rack that fits on the luggage carrier, and I basically just zip tie that pannier onto that rack, and it works out really, really well. So I think that that's really exciting. I think that it's a nice low profile, easy way to do it, be even easy to carry around. The other thing that was really cool about that is that I included a small bag, the waterproof rack bag that I use for fully loaded touring. I was able to fold that up nice and small, and it fits within I believe the compression sack. And so what I can do is actually get everything into that. So if I need to fly, I can check that bag and then have the Brompton with me and put that in the overhead. So that was really exciting to be able to pull all of that off. Now, when it comes to the larger bike, you would think, oh, well, if you can do all this on a Brompton, it should be a lot easier for the larger bike. And what I found was that's not completely true. So remember, I am trying to lower the profile. And while I suppose I could end up with just one pannier on the side, I don't like that for balance sake, putting a lot of weight on just one side of the bike. So what I'm toying with doing is doing additional compression sacks. I actually have an extra one of the Evo sack, the Evo Air, I believe they're called, that allows you to push the air out while it still be waterproof inside. So I think that I could run with two of those, and I actually purchased an inexpensive frame bag, which is sort of my dalliance into the whole bike packing setup. I think I can fit a fair amount of stuff in there, certainly clothes and maybe a couple of other things in there. Not the tent. I think that would end up having to be done in a different way. But what I think that I can do for the larger bike setup is be a little bit more aerodynamic and not have two panniers jutting out from the sides, and still be able to have all of this gear and be able to do a multi-day tour without any problem. One other thing that I would add to all of this is I start off by saying I did not include my stove. Well, it turns out I think I might be able to fit a stove in either of these two setups as well. So it just sort of depends on how aggressive I want to get, how tightly packed I want to get. But I do think that it's kind of exciting that this type of setup is possible. I looked at maybe even going to a hammock style overnight. I did that, of course, when I did that crazy August trip a couple of years ago, when I did the transit related or transit aided ride from DC to Boston. That's certainly a possibility to drop the tent too, but I like the tent. I like having it. I like having that shelter. I like having that privacy. So while I did some looking at some smaller tents or some lighter tents, I found that the sacrifice that I would have for a smaller tent or one of those quote unquote ultra light tents, the really expensive ones, it didn't save a ton of weight when all was said and done compared to the Alps mountaineering tent that I have. So I kind of like what I got, and I think I'm going to kind of stick with it as much as I can. I may consider replacing things down the road if I do find that, say, for instance, the tent is offering up too much bulk for what it's worth, or maybe looking into some other stove options, which of course I've talked about on this show ad nauseum. So I think I like what I've got with that as well. Just the experimenting over the years has pared me down quite a bit, but this was exciting because I feel like that this was the real minimalist setup that I've been looking for all along. So more to come on all of this. I think that when I do a tour next month, which I am going to do, and I'll talk more about that probably on a future show, not too far in advance either, or not too far in the distant future because it's coming up soon. But I think that I'm going to be trying this setup with whichever bike that I end up taking. And that's still an open question at this point too, because I still haven't quite decided where I'm going yet, although I have a couple of ideas. I talked about that on last episode as well. So that's it for paring down things. I'm curious what you do to pare down your gear if you are a more experienced rider, or if you're doing this for the first time, what are your concerns about bringing? Do you feel like you're overpacking? Do you feel like you're underpacking? What I've been finding is that I've been doing this for a while, and every single time I ride, I'm able to reduce it down a little bit more, and I'm not really replacing a lot of gear. It's just knowing what I don't need to bring. That's what's kind of giving me the freedom to go a little bit more minimal. Next up on the show is still in the area of gear talk, and it's a quick little discussion about keeping things charged when you're on tour and going beyond batteries and dyno hubs. What are the strategies that I use to plug in while I'm on the road or the trails? And I think that this is probably not something that is, revolutionary. It's just sort of what's my plan when I'm out on the road. And I've talked about this a little bit, and I don't want to repeat too much because I do want to focus more on these strategies. But, I've moved away from the dyno hub philosophy. Not that I don't think that they're great. I think that they can work really well, especially if you're not going to be on a tour where you're going to have access to places to plug in. The thing is that I found that for most of my tours that I very rarely go more than a few days without having opportunities to plug in for at least an hour or more. And that can really be a lot of time to be able to kind of juice up. So I've gotten away from that. I've gotten more into battery capacity, and I've talked about that as well. I like to carry 2 or perhaps 3, depends on what the length of my ride is, high capacity USB batteries to power up my stuff. I've talked about the new battery that I have that actually is a 3-prong standard 120 volt outlet charger that I can use for a computer. I haven't had to use that yet for a larger tour, but I may be in the near distant future. So I'm looking more at having batteries, and when I need to, powering up when I've got the opportunity at an outlet. So here's what I do for strategy when it comes to all of this. So the number one place where you would want to consider doing something like this, of course, would be if you end up at a B&B or a hotel night or something along those lines. That is sort of file under duh. You're going to be sleeping. You might as well be plugged in. You've got outlets where you're at. It works out just fine. Some campsites actually have electrical outlets at the hiker-biker areas, or you otherwise have opportunities to plug in maybe at the bathrooms, things like that. Word to the wise, I've had a battery stolen from a place where it was unattended. I know that for many of you who go riding, I've had the same experience. You'll see people who will plug in their phones or plug in their batteries and walk away thinking that the campsites are a perfectly secure place. Who would steal from a fellow biker? Well, it happens. I mean, it's happened to me at least once, and I've heard about it before too. So when I do take that risk, I do it knowing that I'm taking a risk. And I always make sure I use my cheapest, most beat up charger, my cheapest and most beat up cable, if I've got a choice, and then just a battery, because the batteries are cheaper than the devices themselves. I'm always looking to make sure that I protect my phone and my computer above all else. In fact, my computer never leaves my side. It's always by me. Phone, I will, keep maybe in a bag inside the tent if I'm going to take a shower or something like that. But even then, I almost always bring that with me. But I never leave them plugged in unattended. That's just asking for it. And clearly, I've lost a battery once in my travels. That's not a lot in terms of sample size, but, hey, it's out there. Crime of opportunity, right? So you want to be careful about that. So those are the places where you'll be able to get full top-off charges, where you'll be able to plug them in overnight and everything will be fine. Problem is that doesn't always happen, especially if you're like me and you tend to do a lot of camping and you are going to be in camping areas where you don't have access to electricity. Maybe they're in campsites that don't even have electrical outlets in the bathrooms. That happens quite frequently. Or you're doing some wild camping for a night or two. That's when I start looking at opportunities in towns. And I think that this is the area where you want to sort of do this in a way that is as efficient as possible, knowing full well that you're not going to end up fully topping off everything that you've got. But if you can, during the time that you're available there at either any of these places that I'm going to talk about in a second, that you can maximize the amount of juice that you can pull in and store it, that's your best bet. So here's the places that I tend to look for when I'm in a town and I know I'm in need of juice, or I know I'm going to be there long enough that I might as well at least try to get some extra percentages in my batteries while I go. Coffee shops, number one. I am in coffee shops a lot. I love to get a cup of coffee and a small bite to eat often in these towns, especially if they're few and far between. What I'll typically try to do is find a seat Ditto with a restaurant, which is next on my list, that has an outlet so I can be right by my stuff. Otherwise, I try to finagle it so that I'm sitting in a place where I can see my stuff plugged in, and that really helps. A lot of touring towns, a lot of trail towns cater to bikers, and they'll actually have strips, and they'll have places that are actual kind of devoted charge zones. Those are really nice. I'm thinking about places that aren't like that, the Pig and Pancake in Lincoln City, Oregon, a place that I love to go to all the time. They don't have that, but I actually have been there a few times and I know exactly where the outlets are. So I try to finagle getting a booth where I know there's an outlet. Ditto with some of the restaurants that I've been to on the C&O, the Krabby Pig, another place where I know there's a few outlets in the corners. And so I try to finagle to get a seat there if it's not too crowded. So coffee shops and restaurants, those are two great places. You'll be there probably for about 45 minutes or an hour. That's a lot of juice. It's not going to top your phone off if you're down 30%, but you might be able to get it up a bit. One of the things that I find that can be helpful, just sort of as a sidebar, is to consider bringing along a mini power strip or a splitter, something like that, so that you can charge, if you only have access to one outlet, that you can charge more than one thing at once. When you have access to an outlet, that is gold. I mean, it is the fastest way that you will ever be able to charge. So if you can get an hour's worth in, well, it's that many electrons that you're going to be able to store in your phone or your batteries. So try to think about maximizing that way as well. Another place that I tend to look for when I'm making a stop again is at a gas station. I am not proud to admit I enjoy myself some gas station cuisine when I am riding, mainly because it's usually cheap and quick and easy to just roll my bike up, lean it against the wall, or lock it up to a rack depending on where I'm at, go in, grab something cold, grab something with some calories in it, come back out. What you may find at some gas stations is either a seating area with outlets. That's a great thing. Same thing as a restaurant. But typically, and this is kind of strange, outside, I have found at a lot of gas stations, there are outlets that are just sort of randomly against the exterior walls. Why, I have no idea, but it seems to be, I don't want to say common, but frequent enough that it's worth mentioning. So if you're in a town and you're going to be stopping at a Gas and Sip or an Easy Mart or whatever it is in the town of note that you're in, look around for those random outlets. They can be really helpful. So you can grab your stuff inside, come back out, have your bike there, kind of sit there for a half hour, drink up, enjoy, and then get rolling again. And then you've got about 20, 30 minutes of charging. It's worth it. It's something. It's extra juice that you're not burning down. Grocery stores, another great place. If you're in a town with a larger grocery store, very frequently there's going to be a lot of food that, at least in the States, I'm sorry, I'm being very US and probably Canadian centric here, but in the States, at least, a lot of the larger grocery stores will have pre-made food and actually cafes there. Not too different from a coffee shop or a restaurant. There'll be seating areas. There may be outlets there. And frequently I will find myself getting food for multiple days, perhaps, and snacks and things like that. And then I'll get something to eat for the there and then, and I'll charge up while I'm sitting there enjoying my snack, my meal, whatever. So grocery store eating areas. Another thing about grocery stores is that they also seem to have the exterior random outlets as well. And one of the reasons why they may have those exterior random outlets, and perhaps why the gas stations do as well, is that outside vending machines, I think, have maybe gone away a little bit more. They used to be really prevalent in the US, especially, through the years when I was growing up. And I feel like I don't see them as often anymore. I don't know why that is, but the legacy of those machines being out there are outlets that are frequently not being used. And so whether you're at a gas station or you're at a grocery store, and maybe this is the explanation, maybe there used to be a Pepsi machine or a Coke machine there selling their sugar water all those years ago, and it's gone now, but that outlet remains. That might be something that you can look for, but also look for those vending machines, because frequently, say you're in a bus station or you're in a train station and you're doing a fast forward, if you look for those vending machines, which are almost always in places like that, you may find the ability to plug in behind those machines where there are no outlets otherwise available. So look for where electricity is being consumed and see if there is a spare outlet. That's the place where I've found the greatest luck. When I've run out of options, there's nothing around, things are closed, I'll find a vending machine, or I'll find a light or a sign, a neon sign or something like that that's literally plugged in, and you'll be able to find maybe a secondary outlet that'll work there. I do not recommend unplugging things to be able to plug your stuff in. That's a good way to be a bad citizen, and we like to be good citizens at the Pedalshift Project. So don't unplug other people's stuff as well. So anyways, those are my thoughts on powering up while you're on the road. To sum up, focus on batteries, carry, small but high capacity batteries. Find opportunities when you stop to plug in whenever you have the notion to do it. You never know when you're going to need that extra juice. If you're stopping for an overnight in someplace with the juice, plug in definitely there, top off, maximize, protect your electrons. But whenever you're stopping for 20, 30 minutes or an hour, look for an outlet, look for that opportunity, because it's always good to have more juice than you need. And that's always been my motto, and it's been really good. I don't think I've ever been in a situation on any tour where I've run out of juice in all of my batteries and my phone. It's actually always worked out well. So these are some of the strategies that you can use to keep juiced up while on tour. Next up on the show is connections, and we've got a great note from friend of the show, Chris Barron. He writes in and he says, "Hey Tim, just wanted to share that the weather and my schedule finally aligned so that I was able to get my first bike overnight under my belt. Not anything super exciting, but did a good 46-mile ride from my house to John Bryan State Park near Yellow Springs, Ohio, and then back the next morning. I didn't really explore the park at all. I was pretty beat by the time I got there, so just cooked some dinner and got a fire going and relaxed at the campground. Lessons learned. Number 1, my legs aren't as strong as I thought they were. I'm used to fairly flat roads here in central Ohio, but the last 10 miles to the park had some rolling hills coupled with a pretty good headwind, and I ended up having to hop off and push my bike up the last steep climb into the park. That is so typical, especially around state parks. I don't know why. It's like they're built on hills or something. So, lesson 2. Make sure your bike fit is really dialed in before a loaded bike trip. This was my first real long ride on this bike with it loaded with all my gear, and I started getting some pretty bad knee pain on the way home the second day. After checking some adjustments, I ended up tweaking the saddle position a bit, so hopefully that will solve it. Yeah, I think that's your best bet. Knee pain, as I've talked about on past shows, almost always a function of saddle height. So check that out. And I think I've talked about that on a past show. So look into that as well. I think in the Emergency Fixes show, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Chris continues. I have some pictures at his Instagram feed. I got a link in the show notes, and I have a few of them up on the page as well. Thanks for the podcast and the motivation to get me started doing this. Thinking about doing a trip on the Gap later this summer or fall, and may check in on that at some point in the future. Happy riding, Chris Barron. Chris, thank you so much. Congratulations for getting one in under your belt. Those are 2 great lessons to take away. I would say if you're new to bike touring, you are going to be getting lessons on your first ride, your second ride, your third ride, frankly, all of them. I learn something every single time I get out there, and I try to impart them out to you through this show, but this sort of collective wisdom that we develop through, my site, Crazy Guy on a Bike, all the various bike touring posting folks out there. Bike touring posting folks, that was awkward. All of the folks with blogs and websites on bike touring, there's all sorts of great information out there, and so you can learn a lot from other people as well. So thanks, Chris, for sharing your lessons, and I'm glad you enjoyed your trip. And keep tweaking those bike settings. You'll find the right place, the right adjustments, and have a more comfortable ride as a result. And sorry about hitting that invisible hill with those headwinds, but it is a functional problem with bike touring. We tend to get those things, unfortunately. And we like to close out the show with a big thank you to all of our supporters through the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can keep the show listener supported while expanding the offerings. It's just a few bucks a month, or we've got one-shot support, annual support, whatever you would like to be able to help make this show happen. Pedalshift.net/society. And of course, Pedalshift.net/stickers if you would like a very delayed set of stickers sent to you, because I am terrible at getting stamps onto the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittis, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Delgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arney, Nathan Poulton, Derek Wagner, Harry Hugel, and a big thank you also to all anonymous and past contributors for making the show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfields' latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.